The Gorgias is actually a discussion about education, a mode of education that began about 427, I think, is when this made its way into Athens. And it was introduced by this guy, Gorgias, right? The model of education that Gorgias practiced was called oratory, the skill of persuading large public audiences on topics of important public concern. Its goal was to persuade the model of communication that you've grown up with on TV and so on, right? He sees around him, Plato does, a bunch of young people who grew up being taught that the purpose of education was that you learn to spin things in such a way that people will think you're right. Plato thinks that's a dreadful, dreadful misuse of education, and he needs to challenge it. He really wants to challenge it. To do that, he needs to address young people who think, well, of course the goal of my life is to get ahead in society, and Gorgias' mode of education is the way to do that. Socrates says, I'll try to describe my view of oratory. There is, I take it, something you call body and something you call soul. Polus, whose name means colt, he's a spirited young guy. He says, well, yes. And Socrates says, do you also think there's a state of fitness for each of these? That is, that it's possible for a body to be healthy or sick or somewhere along that continuum, and for a soul to be either healthy or sick or somewhere along that continuum? And Polus says, yes, I do think that. Socrates thinks he would have apparently would have a very difficult time explaining the problem that he has with oratory unless he could begin with somebody saying, I agree that there's such a thing as body and such a thing as soul. If Socrates were to ask me if there's something that I call soul, I would answer, that's very interesting. I'm a little surprised at how many of you say yes. If Socrates were to ask me if a soul can appear to be healthy but really be sick, I would answer, I think I know what soul means. So there's a lot of uncertainty as to just, a lot of people would say, I don't know exactly what he means by that. Here's the simple way that I try to explain what I think the most naive ancient view of the soul is. One morning, little Johnny runs up and says, Grandma, get up for breakfast, and Grandma doesn't get up for breakfast, right? And Grandma's not going to get up for breakfast ever again. Whatever made Grandma Grandma is gone, right? I mean, her body's there, but she doesn't talk anymore. She doesn't think anymore. She doesn't smile anymore. As he tries to explain what he means by oratory, Socrates makes the claim that he doesn't really think it's a kind of knowledge. Really skillful orators are not people who really understand the world. They don't understand what's true. Instead, they have a skill at giving people what they want. In other translation, it's called pandering. And he says, now I know that doesn't make any sense to you, so let me think about professions that we are familiar with. Cosmetics is to gymnastics as pastry baking is to medicine, right? And Socrates says, think about all these roles. What is the relationship between the cosmetologist and the physical trainer? When you go to a cosmetologist, you go in and you say, oh, I'm just feeling terrible and I feel ugly, and the cosmetologist says, yeah, we put some little lines here and toner thingies here, and nobody will ever notice, right? We will make you look like what you are not. The physical trainer, if I were to lose 40 pounds, not just losing the weight, but also building up some muscle and doing all those, 400 sit-ups a day and, all those things, right? I would look better because I would be better, right? If my body is healthy and well-toned and all those other things we can imagine, then it would look that way. Now, the next one, my extra pounds are beginning to bring my blood pressure up to where the next time I go in, my doctor is going to say, yeah, we got to deal with that. He's going to say, you got to go on a diet. But he's going to tell me to eat things that I do not want to eat, right? And not to eat things I do want to eat. And so I go into my favorite Italian restaurant, and I sit down and I tell Chef Luigi, I say, oh man, I'm just so down today. Oh, he says, I'll make you feel wonderful. The chef can make me feel good, right? The doctor will make me feel bad in order to make me be good, which will make me feel good. Socrates is setting up a point here about there's certain functions that establish good shape, and then there are others that fix us when we go wrong. Now he's going to come round to the soul, because he wants to say a soul can be healthy, a soul can be sick. We can get pretty ugly, right? Get filled with anger that's very destructive, and it causes us to, we end up saying cruel things to people that we really love. Some things can destroy that part of us, not our body necessarily, but destroy that part of us that is the qualitative who we are, and other things can build us up and make us stronger, better. Plato's going to suggest that there's something like a trainer that stiffens us up and says, here's what your soul should be like. And he's going to call that, in very general terms, law. You grew up with some laws, right? Not necessarily laws on the book, but somebody told you, don't lie, don't hit your sister. And is it great fun to live under those rules? To go through the hard work of learning not to hit your little sister? It's kind of a struggle, right? And then there's like the doctor, right? The punishment feature of laws remediates our souls when they get sick, right? That's the principle of law. Laws, of course, are intended to make the soul better. It's easy for us to set up rules that we like and that make us look good because we get to make them, right? We sure don't want to set up rules that say, let's get tough with ourselves. SUVs, some people say they're a problem, but we like them, right? And so we'll drive along at 12 miles per gallon, no matter what the consequences, thank you. Do you see that affects our souls? That is, it says to us, how should we live? What kind of people should we be? And the rule says, you get to have whatever it is you want and can afford, and you don't have to worry about restraining yourself. Self-restraint is not a required feature. And Socrates is saying the problem with the way people, with the kind of reasoning people are learning, oratory, taught formally in education, is that it's teaching them that the task is to spin stuff, not search for what's really true and what really needs to be done to make things better, but rather just to say whatever makes people feel good. And he says, that's why I think it's not real knowledge. It's just pandering or flattering. It's telling people what they want, but that's a terrible thing to do if, in fact, what they want is not what they need. To think about this against something like Nazi Germany, where the laws were actually telling people to become something that was ugly beyond telling. Real government is concerned with telling us what we really should be as people and then helping us remediate that if we get it wrong. And so they get to talking about who's successful and unsuccessful. And Socrates says the goal is to be a good person. And if you're unjust or wicked, then you're not successful, you're unsuccessful. Polus says, yeah, but there's this guy Archelaus. He's in charge of Macedonia. He is one of my idols because he's like top dog in his country. And how did he get there? By sheer ambition and cleverness. He wanted power and he seized it. He had to kill some people, like relatives, to do it. Then the rightful heir, who was this little kid, 7 years old, he threw him down a well and killed him. And so he became unimaginably rich and successful by Polus standards. I would rather live on the street and die a slow, painful death than become successful as Archelaus did. Talk about souls as silly and ignorant. I mean, this is actually probably the chief thing I wanted to accomplish in this, that I think needs to be accomplished in this, is to take a word like soul, which very reasonably can be looked at. You've got to save your soul. You know, when you hear it that way, enough times, it's easy to dismiss something because of the word that's used. A thinker, because of the words he uses. And he may not be right, but he's saying something that's smart, and so it's worth listening to. And so I wanted you to get over, to the degree that you can, a kind of a revulsion at individual words.